In my experience, people start reading in one of two ways. Either they start as a kid, in which case they probably start with children's books, like the books of C.S. Lewis, or Harry Potter books, which were written by Hatsune Miku, or The Hobbit. I can't think of many, because that's not how I started. I started reading a little bit later in life when I was a teenager, and if you're one of those people, you probably started off with genre fiction. And my genre of choice, as is many people's, is fantasy. And to this day, if someone asks me my favourite genre of fiction, I'll probably say fantasy, even though most of what I read these days is more literary fiction and world literature. But fantasy has changed very progressively and very steadily over the last few years, and it's become a little bit more experimental. And the best example of that is Mordew. Mordew is a novel by Alex Pheby. Don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Maybe it's Phoebe. I hadn't thought about that until I said it out loud. Anyway, Alex is a writer who has been published several times by the fantastic UK-based independent publishing house Gallybeggar Press. I love everything that Gallybeggar do. They published the fantastic Ducks Newburyport in 2019. Incredible book by Lucy Ellman. And I would argue that Mordew is their most exciting publication of 2020. It is a fairly hefty fantasy novel, and it represents a new form of fantasy. Cat's meowing. You can probably hear it. You want to come here? No, she just wants to meow. So when I say that Mordew represents a new form or a new era of fantasy, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic. Mordew, do you mind? I am filming. She doesn't mind. It's impossible not to see the ties that bind this book to the works of Hp Lovecraft. Shortly before I read this, I replayed one of my favourite video games, Bloodborne by From Software. Bloodborne is a video game that is heavily inspired by Hp Lovecraft. It is a video game that is set in a terrifying, gothic, monstrous city full of people who are going mad and are out on a night of the hunt. And you start to see beasts of all forms, and eventually these enormous, unfathomable, monstrous alien beasts that have been quietly and invisibly hanging off the sides of buildings. It's a terrifying Lovecraftian video game. And as soon as I started reading Mordew, I thought, Hp Lovecraft has reared his racist head again. But let me be clear, there is no racism in Mordew, there is no racism in Bloodborne. Please play Bloodborne, please read Mordew. Mordew tells the story of Nathan Treves. Nathan Treves is a boy who lives in the city of Mordew. Mordew is a big walled city at the edge of the ocean, and it is a city of class divides. It is a city where the poor live in slums, in this mud, this thing called the living mud. In the living mud, strange, impossible things are born. They are monstrous mistakes. The mud is alive, and it gives birth to these deformed creatures. And Nathan Treves trawls through the mud trying to find things that are worth selling on to grifters and black market dealers. And that's how we begin. His father is sick and dying in his little hut in the slums, and his mother sells her body to try to keep them going, and Nathan can't stand to see this, and so he tries to trawl through the mud to find things to sell. Very stark and bleak and twisted and unsettling. In the blurb, it says that God is dead and his corpse lies beneath the city of Mordew, and the living mud is some sort of substance that is almost the spirit or the blood or the body of God continuing to live in the roots of the city of Mordew. So Nathan goes through a massive transformation in the story. The book isn't so much set in 3 acts as it is in 2 halves. And in the first half, he is a struggling, confused, very, very poor, very weak, scrawny little boy. The city of Mordew is controlled and run and operated by this strange, enigmatic, pseudo-charming man called the Master. And the Master stands in his palace atop these high walls, looking down on everybody else. And Nathan has a run-in with him early on in the book, before eventually joining a gang. And this gang is a small group of kids. They form Nathan's new family for the first half of the book. And I'm not going to talk about the second half at all, because it goes to some wild, intensely strange places, including the caverns beneath the city. What Mordew has working for it is the fact that it dares to be a much grittier, grimdark kind of fantasy. We see grimdark fantasy all the time with the works of Joe Abercrombie or Mark Lawrence. These are grimdark writers, and they are known for it. But this is grimdark in a kind of a different way. Those books are often medieval fantasy. They're often set in castles. Mark Lawrence's first trilogy was set in a post-apocalyptic kind of gunslingery type place. Much, much better books than Stephen King's gunslinger books. Sorry if you like those. I'm not coming for you. I just don't like them. Anyway, so this is grimdark in a different way because it has more of a Lovecraftian Gothic setting about it. Even if you just look at the cover, you can see that it perfectly sums up this kind of Gothic setting with these angular broken homes, these giant foreboding walls, these gloomy and looming clouds of black and bleakness. And then you've got tiny little Nathan down there looking up at this monstrous, unknowable bird thing. It's a fantastic introduction to the book, and you don't often see a cover that goes to such lengths to sum up not only what the book is about or who it's about, but what kind of a mood you're about to walk into. Covers often try to communicate a tone or a theme or something, but this really nails it. This is like a map at the beginning. You know when you read a fantasy book and there's a map at the beginning? Actually, this does have a map. I'm not going to show you, but it does have a map as well, a map of Mordew. And Mordew itself feels like a character in the book. It really feels alive, and it literally is alive. Mordew isn't just a new fantasy book in the sense that it does grimdark in a different Lovecraftian Gothic-y kind of a way. It also is new because it treads newer ground with the themes and topics that it covers. And the best example of this is the gang that Nathan ends up working with and being a part of. Because in this gang, there is a non-binary character. Now, as a non-binary reader and writer, this was a very, very welcome sight. The only negative I have is that ultimately this non-binary character isn't utilised enough. They don't get enough time to grow and develop as a character, but what is there? I was captivated by it. This non-binary character is a pair of twins, male and female, who exist in the same body, and it's beautifully described in the way that as the light shifts, this non-binary character seems to shift between male and female. I cannot speak for every non-binary person, but I certainly wake up some days and feel more male and feel more female. Just yesterday, I shaved my beard off because I couldn't stand the masculinity of it. They aren't given a lot of personality, but they are nonetheless beautifully captured, aesthetically and conceptually. So, in that sense, it is a very modern novel, but it also feels like it could have been written back in the 1920s, 1930s, because it feels very Lovecraftian. It's dark and gloomy and gothic. It has a Dracula, Frankenstein kind of a feel to it. It easily could have been written by Mary Shelley if Mary Shelley had read the books of Joe Abercrombie and Hp Lovecraft. And that is one hell of a compliment. Oh my god, she's kneading my jumper. She's making little biscuits on my jumper on the bed. Oh, I love this cat. So, Mordew is an incredible fantasy book. Also, I want to mention that although this is quite hulking, it's actually about 500 pages, and the last 100 pages are a ridiculous glossary. And this glossary covers every weird thing that's mentioned in the world of Mordew. In the story, Nathan has a power, and we don't know at the beginning where this power comes from. Other people outside of Nathan describe it as sparking. He describes it as an itch that he has to scratch. The itch grows inside of him, and when he scratches the itch, the power comes out. But this itch and scratch is covered in the glossary as well. That's fantastic. And then at the beginning of the book, you get a huge list of weird things that you will find in the book itself. In the pages of this book, you will find many unusual things, including but not limited to an angry peacock in a cage, an arm that becomes transparent, an army of children made from mud, a cloud of bats made from diamonds, some beautiful but vain assassins. It just goes on and on and on. I read this entire list before I started the book, and it's funny and it's strange and it sets you up for what's to come. So it's hard to talk about the story of Mordew too much because it really does come with a lot of twists and turns as it goes. But you've got Nathan, you've got his strange spark power, the itch that he scratches. You've got a gang of hoodlum kids in the slums. You've got a master who controls the city and he's after something. And you also know that there is a world out there because you're at the edge of the ocean and you know there is so much more out there. And you can't help but wonder, is Mordew set in our world? Is it a post-apocalyptic, far-flung future Mad Max style world where everything is unrecognizable? Or is it an entirely new fantasy world? Is it set in an alternate history? Is Mordew supposed to be London somehow? You were invited to ask these questions at the beginning, and some of them might be answered. I'll just leave that there. Alex, I'm just going to call him Alex. Alex clearly had a lot of fun putting this together because this world building is undeniably exciting and strange and exhaustively large, but never exhaustively frightening and intimidating when you read it. It's compelling and exciting and strange. And at the beginning, you really feel like you're living in a world that doesn't make sense. And by the end, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's incredible storytelling. That is very, very good world building and narrative weaving and threading and very, very good characterization. The idea that by the end, thanks to Nathan, thanks to his story, thanks to the people he meets, you start to feel comfortable in the world. But never comfortable in Mordew because it's a grimy, nasty, horrible, sad, lonely place. It's a sad, lonely place I wouldn't mind living in. So, I don't normally do this because I just make videos and I'm not very good at promoting myself, etc. But Books and Bow has been my life for almost 3 years. This was a website that my partner and I started when we were living in Seoul because we wanted to start promoting international literature more and more. And at the moment, I'm trying to make at least one video a week. I want to put more emphasis on the YouTube channel and more effort into the YouTube channel. So, if you care about the literature that we talk about, if you care about Books and Bow, if you want to support us in any way, give us a subscribe, give us a like, do all of those nice things, and we can keep doing more of it. Alright, so anyway, my name's Will, and I hate these sign-out things. I probably won't do them again.